Well, it is a mystery that so far police have not been able to solve. A body.
Those Google searches included what are the chances to survive in real life. Your Honor, I just want to be clear at the offset of this hearing.
On October 18th, 2024, in Cleveland, Ohio, something happened that would shatter the quiet rhythm of an entire community. 32-year-old Dai'mond Vaden stabbed her boyfriend, 32-year-old George Cox Jr., in the stomach. And then she just watched. Watched as he died. She didn't call 911. She didn't scream for help. Instead, she picked up her phone and typed a question into Google. What are the chances of surviving in real life if you're stabbed several times in the stomach? Then she took his body and she dumped it in a river. For the next 7 months, Dai'mond Vaden walked around Cleveland like nothing had happened at all. This is the story of two former lovers, a relationship that never quite let go of itself, and the secret that stayed buried in the water until two kayakers stumbled onto something no one was ever supposed to find.
Back on May 16th, a kayaker found a body in a Huron River marsh. That body remains unidentified.
George Anthony Cox Jr. was born on October 6, 1992. He was 32 years old the day he died, 12 days shy of his 33rd birthday. He grew up in Cleveland, went to Rhodes High School, one of the city's public schools. Nothing unusual, nothing that stood out. But after graduation, George did something a lot of people talk about and never actually do. He left. He moved all the way to Mississippi to enroll in a Job Corps program, a federal training center for young people who want a real trade without going the college route. He trained in two completely different fields at once: information technology and customer service. Tech on one side, people skills on the other. That's not a random combination. That's someone who wanted options and who understood that succeeding in life takes more than one skill. And by the time of his death, that bet on himself had paid off. George was working as a transportation supervisor at a Dyer Serenity House LLC. That's not a job you fall into. It means route planning, managing staff, keeping schedules tight, and staying calm when things go wrong in real time. The people who loved him called him June and Janbag. Nicknames like that don't get handed out to just anyone. They go to the people who make a room feel lighter. And by every account, that's exactly who George was. The guy who cracked the joke at the right moment, who somehow became the center of gravity in any room he walked into.
Pounds with dark facial hair and around 20 to mid-30s in age. The body.
He stood about 5'5" or 5'6", weighed around 160 pounds, black hair, brown eyes. An ordinary 32-year-old man. The kind you'd walk past on the street without a second glance. Nothing about that description hints at what was coming. Nothing hints that 7 months later, his body would surface in swampy river water, wrapped in a sheet, bound with rope. We know a lot less about Dai'mond Vaden. She was born August 1st, 1992, just 2 months older than George. She lived in Cleveland, and that's basically where the public record stops. No details about her education, her past jobs, or her life before she and George became a couple. The two of them shared an apartment near the intersection of Bosworth Road and Peony Avenue in Cleveland. And everyone who knew them describes the relationship the same way, on and off. Now that phrase can sound almost harmless from the outside. Plenty of couples break up and get back together. But underneath a phrase like that, there's usually something more specific going on. A cycle where neither person can let go completely, and neither one can commit for good either. Who left first? Who came crawling back? What set off the breakups? What triggered the reconciliations? None of that is on the public record. All we know is that the instability itself was obvious enough for people around them to notice it. So here's a question worth sitting with before we get to that final day. What happens to two people who break up and get back together, over and over, for years? There's no single answer. Sometimes it's real affection that just never learns how to function. Two people who are drawn to each other, but can't build anything stable. Sometimes it's dependency. Both people knowing the relationship is broken, but too afraid of being alone to actually walk away. And sometimes, underneath that on-again, off-again label, there's a slow escalation happening. Every breakup a little sharper than the last. Every reconciliation a little more fragile. And here's another question worth asking before we move forward. How did the people around them see this relationship? Neighbors, George's co-workers, mutual friends. Did anyone catch a warning sign before that day? The public record doesn't include a single account from a neighbor or co-worker describing tension in the relationship beforehand, which means one of two things. Either nobody ever documented it, or the couple looked completely normal to the outside world, right up until the end? What we do know is what happened just before October 18th. According to the available information, the fuse was lit by George himself. He told Dai'mond he was done, that he was tired of her behavior, and that the relationship was over. Simple words, but they leave a lot of room for questions. What did George actually mean by behavior? Was this years of built-up exhaustion from the instability finally boiling over? Or was it just something said in the heat of one specific argument? No different from dozens of arguments they'd already had. There's no clean answer, and the only person who could give one has never seemed interested in giving it. If this story has you hooked, hit that like button. It tells us stories like this need to keep being told. Subscribe so you don't miss the next investigation, and drop a comment letting us know what you think really happened here. Now, let's get back to it. October 18th, 2024. That was the last day anyone saw George Cox Jr. alive. He was in the neighborhood around Bosworth Avenue and Peony Avenue, the same block where he and Dai'mond shared their apartment. Public sources don't give us an exact time, just the date and the location. It was an ordinary residential street, the kind you'd find anywhere in that part of Cleveland. And on that day, the apartment where the two of them had lived through years of a turbulent relationship became a crime scene. At some point that day, an argument broke out, a continuation of the conversation George had started when he told Dai'mond it was over.
The last time he was heard from was October 19th of 2024.
What happened between that first conversation and the moment things turned violent? How long it lasted? Who raised their voice first? Whether anyone else was even in the apartment? None of that is in the public record. We don't know if this fight looked like the dozens before it, or if something was different from the very start. All we know for certain is the outcome. During that argument, Dai'mond Vaden stabbed George in the stomach. Whether it was one wound or several, official sources don't specify. What we do know is that the wound was in the abdomen, an area where a stabbing almost always causes massive blood loss, but doesn't necessarily kill instantly. A person stabbed in the abdomen can stay conscious. They can talk, they can move, for a long time. This isn't the instant death you see in movies. This is a process that can stretch on for tens of minutes, sometimes even hours. And during those minutes, Dai'mond Vaden did not call for help. She stayed exactly where she was and watched George bleed out. She didn't run to a neighbor's door. She didn't dial 911. She didn't try to put pressure on the wound or stop the bleeding by any means available. Instead, she picked up her phone and opened Google, and she typed this, word for word. What are the chances of surviving in real life if you're stabbed several times in the stomach? That search deserves a second look. She's not asking how to save him. She's not searching how to stop bleeding from a stab wound. She's not looking for the nearest hospital. The question reads like someone checking statistics, survival odds, as if the outcome had already been decided and she just wanted a number to confirm it. Does that mean she'd already ruled out saving him? There's no way to answer that for certain. All we can say is that not one word in that search was aimed at helping him. And the fact that she turned to a search engine at all, in that exact moment, is rare, even in the coldest cases investigators come across. Most people who find themselves next to someone dying react on instinct. They panic. They call for help. They try something, anything, even if it's useless. Sitting down to type out a careful question and wait for search results, that's not panic. That takes a level of composure and a level of distance from what's happening right in front of you that most people simply don't have. The official cause of George Cox Jr.'s death has never been made public. We know he was stabbed in the abdomen, that much isn't in dispute. But the exact medical cause, whether it was blood loss, organ damage, or something else entirely, has never been released. That detail, it seems, exists only in the sealed case file. We also don't know how much time passed between the stabbing and George's actual death. Public records don't give an exact time. All we know is that Dai'mond Vaden waited. And that word, waited, matters. It wasn't instant. It was a process. One that stretched on long enough for her to change her mind at any point, to call 911, to try to stop what was happening. She never did. Only after George was dead did Dai'mond Vaden spring into action. She started making calls, including one to her future live-in boyfriend, Emmanuel McQueen Jr., asking for help getting rid of the body. The fact that she reached out to acquaintances instead of police, with one very specific request, tells you her plan came together fast, and it was precise. She wasn't calling to process what had happened. She wasn't calling for advice. She called with a task already in mind, and by all accounts, she found people willing to help her carry it out. whether or not they fully understood what had happened in that apartment on Bosworth Road, how many people responded to those calls, what she told them, how quickly they showed up. None of that is answered in the public record. George's body was wrapped in bedding, a fitted sheet pulled straight from their own apartment, from the bedroom where they'd lived together through years of an unstable relationship.
Was found in a fitted bed sheet tied around the ankles with marine-style rope.
Definitely deemed suspicious based on how we discovered the body, the sheets.
The sheet was tied off with marine-grade rope, the kind used to secure ships and cargo, not something that just happens to be lying around a residential apartment. Whether that rope was already on hand or specifically obtained after George died is still an open question. The body, wrapped and bound, was driven from Cleveland out to the Huron River in neighboring Erie County and dumped in the water. We're not talking about the closest body of water nearby. That's tens of miles away. A deliberate choice to put George's body outside the jurisdiction that would have investigated his disappearance first. Who was actually driving? Who physically moved the body? How many people were involved beyond Vaden and McQueen? What time of day it happened? None of that has been made public. All we know is where it ended up. The Huron River, where the current and time do exactly what they always do to crimes nobody's supposed to find. They try to erase them. And the choice of a river, rather than say a forest, is worth noting too. Water doesn't just hide a body. It changes it, speeds up decomposition, washes away evidence. Whether anyone involved understood that going in, or just picked the river because it was close and convenient, we don't know. Around October 19th, the day after the murder, George's family had their last known contact with him. The record doesn't say whether that was a call, a text, or something else, and it doesn't say which family member received it. What we do know is that after that date, all communication from George stopped completely, because by then he was already dead, his body sitting at the bottom of a shallow stretch of river in Erie County. Is it possible that final message didn't come from George at all? That someone used his phone after his death to make it look like he was still alive? Public records don't answer that. They just note the date and the fact that it happened. But laid side by side, his death on the 18th and the last contact the very next day, that timeline leaves a question hanging in the air. And it's almost certainly a question investigators would eventually have to answer for themselves. After the 18th, Dai'mond Vaden didn't stay in the Bosworth Road apartment. She moved out and moved in with a new man, Emmanuel McQueen Jr. Records don't say how quickly this happened, just that it did. The woman who had just dumped the body of the man she'd shared years of an unstable relationship with into a river found herself under a new roof with a new partner in short order. On November 8th, 2024, almost 3 weeks after the murder, George's family finally filed a missing person report with the Cleveland Police Department.
His father, George Cox Jr., went over to the apartment that he was staying at, looking for him, trying to figure out where his son was at.
It went to the missing persons unit. By that point, George's body had already spent 3 weeks in the Huron River, and the woman responsible was already living somewhere else, building a new life like nothing had happened. 3 weeks is enough time for a family's worry to turn into real fear before they take that step. Likely after trying everything else first, calling him directly, reaching out through friends, maybe even asking Dai'mond herself if they reached her at all. George's disappearance was featured on Fox 8's Missing with Amanda Berry, first in December 2024, and then again on May 20th. That program exists specifically to help find missing people, and the fact that his case got a second airing nearly half a year later tells you something on its own. The case hadn't moved, and it had stayed unsolved long enough to justify bringing it back. It's also worth noting that second airing happened on May 20th, after the body had already been pulled from the river by kayakers, but apparently before it had been officially identified. Which means, even after the body had already been found, George was still officially listed as missing. Not just to the public, to his own family too. As part of the investigation, police carried out a welfare check at the Bosworth Road apartment. What they found left no doubt about how serious things had become. An apartment stripped almost bare of furniture and what looked like blood on the floor.
Cleveland police detectives, including Detective Callahan, went over to that unit on Bosworth and they used luminol inside.
Testing later confirmed it was George's blood and that Dai'mond Vaden was long gone by then. An apartment emptied out, both the furniture and the tenant gone, leaving behind nothing but a stain on the floor. That's not a scene that happens in a single rushed afternoon. That's methodical. It's worth pausing here to think through what might have been happening on both sides during those months, not as established fact, but as a reasonable read on the situation. For George's family, the nearly 3 weeks of silence before they went to police were likely filled with mounting dread, calls that went unanswered, messages sent to mutual friends, questions with no answers. For investigators, the standard process for a missing adult starts with checking last known locations, talking to the people in his life, and searching his home, which is exactly what happened here. And the fact that the blood wasn't noticed right away, only during this later search, suggests that up until that point, this was still being treated as a routine missing persons case, not a homicide. That changed the moment the blood turned up. It's also fair to assume that for Dai'mond Vaden, those weeks between the murder and the missing persons report were tense ones. She had no way of knowing exactly when George's family would go to police, or whether the investigation would eventually lead back to an apartment she'd already cleared out. The fact that she managed to move out and take her belongings before police ever showed up tells you she had time to prepare, whether that was part of the same plan as disposing of the body, or simply someone trying to put distance between herself and the crime scene as fast as possible. That's something we can't know for sure. On May 15th, 2025, some sources say May 16th, around 10 a.m., 2 kayakers out enjoying a day on the Huron River stumbled onto a body in the marshy shallows about 1,000 feet south of the State Route 2 bridge in Huron Township. The body was bound with rope and wrapped in a sheet.
Could be several weeks to months. Because of that, the body was in very poor condition, so they need the public's help.
It had been in the water for more than 7 months, and decomposition was so advanced that identifying the person by sight was impossible. It's worth sitting with the fact that this discovery came from 2 kayakers out for a relaxing morning, not from any lead investigators were chasing. At no point before that had the case pointed to that stretch of the Huron River. The body wasn't found because of the investigation. It was found by chance, because 2 people happened to be paddling through the right patch of water on the right morning. If they hadn't spotted that bundle in the shallows, George's case might have stayed an unsolved disappearance indefinitely. The Erie County Sheriff's Office responded to the scene, though it and the Ohio Bureau of Criminal Investigation came in to process forensic evidence. The autopsy, ordered by the Erie County coroner, was carried out at the Lucas County Coroner's Office in Toledo, a decision that likely came down to needing specialized expertise for a body that had spent so long submerged. Because the decomposition was so advanced, identification dragged on for weeks. There was no way to go by appearance.
Is hoping the public will be able to identify some of the tattoos on that body. Take a good look. These are some possibly recognizable tattoos on the Erie County John Doe.
Investigators had to cross-reference autopsy findings with existing missing persons cases, then confirm it all through DNA. That gap alone, from mid-May when the body was found to early July when it was finally identified, is worth sitting with. Nearly 7 weeks passed before anyone could connect those remains to a name, and to a family that had already spent months waiting for word about their missing son. The whole time, George's relatives likely had no idea that the unidentified remains local news kept mentioning out of Erie County were the very person they'd been searching for since November. On July 2nd, 2025, Erie County Sheriff Paul Sigsworth announced the results. Based on the autopsy, a review of missing persons files, and a confirmed DNA match, the remains were identified as George A. Cox Jr., age 32. From that point forward, the case shifted to the Cleveland Police Department. What had been a missing persons investigation was now officially a homicide. That announcement was the turning point in this entire story, the moment nearly 9 months of uncertainty gave way to something final and unchangeable. Up until July 2nd, George's family, however faint the hope, still had room for it. After that day, there was none left. On July 21st, 2025, at roughly 4:36 p.m., Dai'mond Vaden was arrested. It happened at her new home, the one she shared with Emmanuel McQueen Jr. During the arrest, police found firearms in the house, even though both Vaden and McQueen were under an active weapons ban at the time. That led to a separate charge, illegal firearm possession, against McQueen. Vaden's bail was set at $1 million, a number that reflects both the severity of the charges and how much of a risk investigators believed she posed if released. A preliminary hearing was scheduled for August 2nd, 2025. By the time of her arrest, a little over 9 months had passed since George Cox Jr. was killed in his own apartment. 9 months where Dai'mond Vaden lived her life without giving anyone a reason to suspect the truth, until the Huron River gave up what it had been hiding. 4 days after her arrest, on July 25, 2025, a Cuyahoga County grand jury handed down an indictment. Dai'mond Vaden was hit with 6 counts, 2 counts of murder, 2 counts of felonious assault, tampering with evidence, and abuse of a corpse. There was also a separate charge for illegal firearm possession, tied to the weapon found during her arrest. Emmanuel McQueen Jr. was charged with just 1 count, also illegal firearm possession, nothing tied to the murder itself or to concealing the body. The fact that this case went from arrest to indictment in just 4 days tells you how much evidence prosecutors already had in hand. That kind of turnaround usually means the investigation was already airtight by the time the arrest happened. The arrest wasn't the start of building a case, it was the conclusion of one built long before, and the evidence against Vaden was substantial.
With that information, police went over and talked to, a few days later, talked to Dai'mond Vaden, who he was in a relationship with at the time.
George's blood turned up on clothing seized from her home. The sheet his body had been wrapped in matched bedding taken from the Bosworth Road apartment. On top of that, DNA results and phone records tying her directly to the crime. Any one of these, on its own, might have left room for a defense to push back. A blood match explained by prior cohabitation, a sheet dismissed as coincidence. But stacked together, this evidence formed a chain that was almost impossible to break. The phone records deserve a closer look. That means investigators had more than physical evidence from the scene. They had a digital trail. Calls and messages, likely between Vaden and the people she reached out to for help disposing of the body, or with McQueen after he became her partner. What exactly those records contained was never made public, but the fact that they existed and that they were used means her digital footprint was just as damning as the evidence left behind at the scene. Vaden was originally charged with 2 counts of murder, but as part of a plea deal with prosecutors, she changed her plea. She pleaded guilty to 3 charges: manslaughter, felonious assault, and abuse of a corpse. That shift from murder to manslaughter isn't just wording. It's a fundamentally different legal admission, one that acknowledges her actions caused George's death without formally admitting she intended to kill him. The tampering with evidence charge appears to have been folded into the final plea deal and doesn't appear among the 3 counts she ultimately admitted to. On March 11, 2026, nearly 8 months after the indictment, Judge Richard Bell handed down her sentence.
Your Honor, I just want to be clear at the offset of this hearing that the state is standing before you today seeking the maximum sentence under the plea agreement, which would be 20 years in this case.
But before he announced it, he did something unusual. He personally questioned Vaden, pressing her directly for an explanation, why she did it, and exactly how that day unfolded. That's not standard procedure. In a case with a plea deal already in place and a sentence already agreed to by both sides, the judge doesn't need to determine guilt. That question was already settled, but he clearly felt it mattered for the court and for George's family sitting in that room to hear more than a dry legal summary. He wanted to hear it in her own words. In response, Vaden gave her account of what happened in public for the first time. It all happened so fast, she said. We struggled, trying to save him. I did everything I could to save him. I just didn't call the police, and I regret that. That claim, that they struggled to save him, runs directly against an established fact, that instead of calling for help, she opened a search engine and asked about survival odds from a stab wound. Her words in that courtroom and her actions on the day of the murder simply don't line up, and that contradiction was never resolved, even in what was supposed to be her most honest moment. Another flashpoint in the hearing was a text message Vaden sent her new boyfriend on the very day George's body was found. "You'll be the next one to go missing." Prosecutor Carson Strang argued that message alone proved she felt no remorse. She knew exactly what had been done to George Cox Jr., and this text message alone shows that she felt no remorse, he told the court. Judge Bell asked her directly what she meant by it. She said she was simply worried about her boyfriend, who hadn't been answering her calls that day, an explanation that couldn't be further from the prosecutor's read on it. That contradiction was never settled either. The court accepted her plea on the agreed charges, but what that message actually meant remains an open question for anyone trying to understand what was really going on in her head. One of the most striking moments in the hearing came from Detective Kevin Callahan, a 30-year veteran of the Cleveland Police Department, who said this was the first time in his entire career he'd felt the need to address a courtroom directly. Looking at the judge, he didn't hold back. With Dai'mond Vaden, Your Honor, don't be fooled. She's a good speaker, polite, intelligent, and makes a good impression. What you're looking at, Your Honor, is a wolf in sheep's clothing. He called her a master manipulator, someone who, in his words, showed any semblance of a moral compass. 30 years on the job means he'd seen more defendants than most people can imagine, and he still felt this particular case was worth breaking his own precedent for. Under the terms of the plea deal, Judge Bell sentenced Vaden to a term of 19 years and 8 months to 25 years and 2 months in prison. That kind of range, a minimum and a maximum, means her actual release date will ultimately be decided by a parole board once she's served the minimum. The sentence lined up exactly with what her defense and the prosecution had already agreed to. Today, Dai'mond Vaden is serving out that sentence. Emmanuel McQueen Jr. was charged with a single count, illegal firearm possession, and that remains the only charge against him in this entire case. He was never formally charged with helping conceal the body or dispose of evidence, even though Vaden herself admitted he was one of the people she called for help after George died. Which leaves a question that's never been publicly answered. Who else, besides McQueen, responded to Vaden's calls that night, when George's body was wrapped in a sheet and driven to the Huron River? She admitted, in her own words, that she reached out to multiple acquaintances asking for help, and yet no one besides Vaden herself was ever charged in connection with that part of the crime. Whether that means the others were never identified, or that investigators simply didn't find enough to charge them, isn't something the public record makes clear. The question of motive was never fully resolved either. From the indictment all the way through sentencing, prosecutors never publicly laid out an official motive, sticking only to a general description of an unstable relationship and a breakup conversation right before the murder. For George Cox Jr.'s family, the fallout from this case was permanent in every sense, legal and painfully physical.
What was the date, please?
May 16th of 2025, Your Honor, approximately 7 months after his disappearance.
After more than 7 months in the water, his body was so decomposed that a normal burial wasn't possible. At sentencing, George Cox Sr. handed the judge a photograph showing the condition his son's body was found in, and said words that capture just how much this family has had to carry. "This is what I had to see, Your Honor. It's so painful I can't even describe it. I'll have to live with this for the rest of my life. We had to cremate him because I couldn't bury him in that condition. This family didn't just lose a son and a brother. They lost the chance to say goodbye the way any family deserves to. For a father who spoke those words in open court, that loss became one more weight layered on top of a grief that was already unbearable." This wasn't the only time George Cox Sr. spoke publicly. Back in July 2025, right after Vaden's arrest, he thanked Detective Kevin Callahan and the Cleveland Police Department's missing persons and homicide units for staying on the case, pointing out that so many people go missing every year and that most people never grasp the scale of that until it touches their own family. He admitted that personally, he never believed George's body would be found, but it was. And by his own account, that was the moment it finally felt like justice might actually be within reach. The investigation was led by the Cleveland Police Department's Homicide and Missing Persons units, with support from the Cleveland Homicide Initiative, a task force that includes the FBI's Cleveland Field Office and the Ohio Attorney General's Office of Criminal Investigations. That level of interagency involvement, from local police all the way up to the FBI, tends to show up in cases where early leads dry up fast and different jurisdictions have to pool their resources, especially here, where the body turned up in a different county than the one where the crime actually happened. This case drew national attention, covered by People, Court TV, WKYC, Fox 8, and others. It spread across social media too, on Facebook and Instagram, where headlines leaned hard into the image of a body found bound and wrapped in a river, the kind of detail that stops a scroll and pulls people in. Cuyahoga County Prosecutor Michael O'Malley, commenting on the indictment, put it plainly: "The family of George Cox Jr. has been waiting for answers, and today they are one step closer to justice." Fortunately for his family and the state of Ohio, homicide detectives are smarter than Dai'mond Vaden thinks. That statement, from the prosecutor's office itself, summed up the whole case in one line: months of trying to bury the truth, and in the end, it surfaced anyway. Looking back now, at the whole arc of this story, a volatile relationship between two people from Cleveland, a murder, 7 months of silence, a body found by pure chance, and a final verdict that came a year and a half later. it's hard to shake the feeling that George Cox Jr. deserved none of what happened to him. The man his loved ones knew as Juno and Janbag, the life of the party, the guy who went from a training program in Mississippi to running a transportation department in Cleveland, is remembered by everyone who knew him exactly that way. And Detective Callahan, a man who spent 30 years watching what people are capable of doing to one another, felt it was worth standing up in that courtroom to warn everyone about a wolf in sheep's clothing, someone whose charm and easy manner had absolutely nothing to do with what she was actually capable of. Those weren't just words for effect. They were a warning built on 30 years of experience. A warning that the ability to charm a room and the ability to commit cold-blooded violence can live inside the same person without ever giving each other away. George Cox Jr.'s family finally got the verdict they'd been waiting for nearly a year and a half later. But no verdict brings back what was lost. Not the man himself, and not the chance to say goodbye to him the way a family deserves to say goodbye to a son and a brother. And maybe the real question this story leaves behind is this: how do you ever learn to spot the mask before it's too late?